أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد الأمين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين يا رب العالمين. Dear respected viewers, thank you once more for joining us back from the holy city of Karbala. It is indeed Thursday night and you're joining me live from the city of Karbala. And of course, as with every Thursday, it's a momentous night, one that's heavily recommended in the Rawayat for visitation of the holy city of Karbala. And of course, you're all in our du'as here from the holy city of Karbala. But we are on your show Back to the Basics, in which our conversation is not pertaining to the ziyarah and not pertaining to the merits of ziyarah of Thursday. So we will return to our original topic being, of course, the worldview of atheism. For those of you who might be slightly perplexed by my reference to atheism as a worldview, they may indeed tune into the previous halaqat or the previous episodes of this series in order to understand why I do indeed refer to atheism as a worldview and not merely the abstract rejection of God. Now, without any further ado, allow us to jump right into the gist of the topic and continue where we left off. And where we left off was to say, of course, that according to certain views of humanity, in which we are nothing more than the evolved product from a genetic soup which evolved into the other animals, and yet we should observe morality. This is, of course, extremely problematic, and we've stated that according to, if we would take a evolutionary ethics-based approach, and take an approach based upon evolutionary behavioral patterns, we would see that this is extremely problematic. Why? You see, morality is something that we as human beings have largely developed, and what I mean by that is we have come to understand and perceive this concept of morality. Of course, this is not a strange thing for me, because I believe that mankind perceives moral laws and that we have a fitrah which guides us to the thing which is right most of the time, if we haven't corrupted that fitrah to a large degree. And so, from my worldview, it's very easy to explain away the concept of morality. Of course, it's also easy to explain away why most people perceive morality, because many people still hold on to presuppositions which existed in a previous worldview adopted by the world civilization. So the West definitely is heavily influenced by a Christian worldview, or as they would call it, a Judeo-Christian worldview, despite the fact they haven't really taken too many tenets from Judaism. And so this is what we see present in the Western world. But if we were to literally follow through with the assumptions of atheism, and particularly those atheists who accept the process of natural selection, which of course most do, because of the dominance of the theory within the scientific realm. And of course, I'm not now discussing whether or not the theory is wrong or right. Of course, there is much evidence for that theory, but it's not my place to discuss, and it's something that will be left to the experts to discuss. What we would say is that let's look at the difference between how we as human beings understand morality and how others understand morality. Animals in the animal world constantly kill one another. And yet no one would put an animal on trial or refer to an animal as having murdered another of the same species from which it comes from. Likewise, certain species of shark are known to copulate forcefully with other females of the same species. Now, of course, we would never denounce this behavior among sharks as rape. So what gives humans this agency, this ability to understand and perceive that these things are actually crimes? Of course, we would argue that this is because we haven't been endowed with the faculty known as the aql. We also have a fitrah, and so we have had it revealed to us that such things are wrong, and such things are indeed objectionably wrong, as opposed to just objectively wrong, rather. I apologize tonight. It seems as if I've probably drank too much coffee or something along the lines, and so my tongue's a bit twisted, but what I meant by that was objectively wrong as opposed to objectionally wrong. So we know that these things are objectively wrong as opposed to subjectively wrong. Of course, if you don't believe in objective morality, then you're in a different boat. But the vast majority of human beings still claim that there is such a thing as objective morality. Now, I would argue that any atheists that hold on to this belief are merely holding on to a spillover and a remnant from their previous worldview. It's not that they actually have a legitimate ontological grounds in which they can ground or provide a decent account or explanation for the phenomenon of objective morality in a world in which everything is reduced to the physical properties and we don't have free will, nor do we have an intellect. But nonetheless, we will continue to analyze what can be said of those who believe in an objective morality and still hold on to atheism. The first thing I want to do is to quote a dialogue which occurred between an atheist and another person taking the role of an atheist. Now, the reason I state that is the opponent of the atheist in this dialogue on objective morality was not actually an atheist. However, his arguments were particularly valid, and he was assuming the very basis that an atheist would assume in arguing through this reasoning process. And we can easily do that. We can, of course, adopt a particular hat and follow through with the presuppositions of another worldview in order to demonstrate that those presuppositions are wrong. And so the conversation went along the lines of this. The first atheist states that the Christian viewpoint is that gay people can't get married and that this behavior outside of marriage is a sin, which means that the Christian view is that anyone who is homosexual must be denied the right to engage in such activity. They can't even have a marriage of a heterosexual nature because any such marriage would be a sham and also sinful. Such a view acts to segregate a section of society by denying them the rights afforded to everyone else, brackets in this case the right to engage in lawful consensual relations. This is the very definition of discrimination. The original posted cartoon points out that we are all sinners, but also specifically casts a light on homosexuality with the clear intent of illustrating that a person that is homosexual is a sinner by virtue of their sexuality. Obviously, there's a lot we could say here, including about how this hardly singles out homosexuals. In fact, Christianity denies the right to sexual activity outside of marriage, but I chose to narrow my focus. Now, the second person adopting the hat of an atheist states the following. I am both amazed and completely unsurprised that you think engaging in such relations is a right. How exactly is this right grounded? What provides the explanatory scope for this right in your view? Where does it come from? So the original posting atheist responds, I believe that every person has a fundamental right to personal autonomy within the constraints of living in a cohesive and sustainable society. This means that such mutual relations between two adults is a right insofar that it is practiced in a way that is not detrimental to society, i.e., consensual relations between two adults in the privacy of their home. Now, some may say that such behavior between two men or two women is detrimental to society, and all I would ask of such people is to show objective evidence to substantiate their claim. No such evidence has been presented or even exists to my knowledge. Until such evidence comes to light, the personal right to autonomy must prevail, and such individuals with such tendencies must be treated as equals under the law. So the one adopting the hat of the atheist responds, you just pushed the question a step back. Where does the fundamental right to personal autonomy come from? To which the atheist responds, that's a bit of an odd question, to be honest. I could turn it around and say, where does your right to restrict my personal autonomy come from? Actually, the idea that people should be able to live in their lives however they like, so long as it does not harm to others, has been around for as long as people have been around. The point really being, either you believe that there is some arbitrary authority who decides for everyone what they can do or cannot do, or you believe that all people are equal and that no individual view is more important or of greater value than another. Personal autonomy is a prerequisite of democracy. You cannot have one without the other. So the one adopting the atheist hat responds, I'm fine with you turning the question around on me, because I can just say there are no rights. This idea of rights is just a mythical hangover from our previous Christian heritage. If evolution is true, we are nothing more than particles in motion. Particles in motion don't have rights. And then he quotes the idea that rights have been around for as long as human beings and says, ha ha ha, as sure as long as you weren't a woman, a child, a slave, or a member of another tribe. And then he quotes the concept that either you can believe in some arbitrary authority, namely a God who decides everything for everyone, what they can or cannot do, or you believe that all people are equal and that no individual view is more important or of greater value than any other. He responds, why? If there is no authority like God, then I'm going to use objective scientific measures to determine people's value. So the old and the infirm who are a burden on society are of far less value than young, strong, smart entrepreneurs like myself, and we definitely don't need handicapped people or those with genetic disorders like Down syndrome. So I simply deny this nonsense about equality. It has utterly no basis in the scientism's reality. And of course, just to point out to the dear viewer who might be tuning in and hearing me say some of these things, I am quoting a dialogue upon the assumptions of those who want to take evolutionary science as our basis for objective fact-finding. If the reality can be broken down to our physical reality, as Dr. Alex Rosenberg has stated in his An Atheist Guide to Reality, then indeed this would be the actual way of thinking. The atheist responds, objectively, are my particles in my body any different to the particles in a desk? Nope. We are all made from the same stuff, but the idea of rights is not one of the inherent physical properties of an object or person. It is the construct of sentient and social species, namely human beings. So the atheist is trying to appeal to the fact that human beings have come up with this concept of a right. He states, for very good evolutionary reasons, humans have naturally developed emotions like empathy and compassion, as these emotions have a net benefit to the species as a whole, and a trait that improves the success of a species is going to stick around thanks to natural selection. As a sentient species, we can take the steps further in that we are able to consciously override our basic instincts and decide either as individuals or as a group which natural traits are acceptable. Brackets, in terms of the overall success of the species or which are not. Evolution is not perfect. It can't decide or develop a trait. It has to wait for it to come along and then apply the rules of natural selection to determine whether the trait is of value in terms of the propagation of the species. Humans have brains. We can think up new traits and qualities, and we can use social pressure to encourage or discourage the expression of traits. When we talk about rights, we are talking about those fundamental freedoms that we as a social group have consciously agreed that everyone should have. Because the idea of rights are entirely man-made, then of course different social groups and individuals are going to have different opinions on what those rights should be. Who is to say that I shouldn't have the right to own a few slaves? I am absolutely entitled to believe that, but whether I can express that right is determined by the society that I live in. So this is the atheist's attempt to now ground the concept of rights as a man-made construct. Of course, most of these constructs are very repetitious. He states, from a legal objective point of view, killing the old and handicapped is a bad idea. The fact that I actually need to explain this suggests that you don't have a particularly good moral compass, which does seem to be a common issue among the religious. I guess if you have a book that tells you what is right or wrong, you don't need to learn how to think for yourself on the subject. Now, what is said in response to this is the following. The idea of rights are entirely, in other words, rights are just a fiction. They don't actually exist, but then why should I be concerned if we say these fictions don't apply to some people, like, for example, homosexuals? I mean, they can't even reproduce anyway, so why give them a fictitious right to marry? Brackets, to take the pertinent example. It's not as if denying them that right is wronging them, because if rights don't really exist and are just a social construct, then there is no wrong, just like there are no rights. If you disagree, well, that's just your evolved instincts competing with mine. Let's settle this in the way of a jungle to decide whose ideas propagate and whose perish. Let's fight. It doesn't have to be to the death. If you're a coward, not that there's anything wrong with cowardice. Indeed, cowardice allows you another chance to propagate your genes from an evolutionary point of view. It's the better option. It seems to me that most societies based on Christian values recognize slavery does not provide a net benefit to individuals. It has nothing to do with a net benefit to society. Tell me, and tell that to Amenhotep II. He wasn't too impressed about losing his entire slave force to Yahweh. He knew what that meant for society. So essentially what we see is that in this argument, it's quite clear that those who want to take the attitude of evolution don't have a basis for arguing that there is such a thing as an objective right or there is such a thing as an objective wrong. And what I mean by right here is not right as in correct, but the concept of a right, the concept of someone having a haqq over something, the concept of there being something which I deserve innately due to being human being. Because if your only basis for this is that it allows us as a species to go further, then you don't really have a great basis. Dear viewers, we're going to go for a very short break now, and when we get back, we'll continue discussing this idea. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers. Thank you so much for joining patiently with us during the break, and of course we're back now. I apologize for the tedious amount of reading we need to do in some of these sessions, but it is only in order to articulate to you some of the real current debates going on in the world based upon these series of thoughts. To quote something a little more objective now, however, I have with me an article which I made reference to a few days ago on this very program. It is indeed called an amoral manifesto. Amoral here meaning a lack of morality, in the same way that atheist means a lack of theism. It is a special column from our erstwhile Moral Moments columnist Joel Marks. Just to give a background to Joel Marks was of course someone that once used to write a column called Moral Moments. He used to argue that one can be a moralist and have a moral conception of morality and have indeed an objective conception of morality and an objective moral theory whilst renouncing a belief in God. But in the year 2010, he completely renounced this view, and after many years of writing that column called Moral Moments, he denounced his view and completely renounced what he was previously saying. He is, of course, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at the University of New Haven in West Haven, Connecticut. He states the following: hard atheism, or what should I name this column? Hold on to your hats, folks. Although it is perhaps fitting that on the actual day which I sit here at my computer writing this column is April the 1st, of course a reference to April Fool's Day, in which in America you would be known to play tricks on people and try and fool them into believing something which is not true. Let me assure you that I do not intend this as a joke. For the last couple of years I have been reflecting on and experimenting with a new ethics, and as a result I have thrown over my previous commitment to Kantianism. In fact, I have given up on morality altogether. This has certainly come as a shock to me and a disappointment, to put it mildly. I think the time has come, therefore, to reveal it to the world, and in particular to you, namely the viewer. Dear reader, who have patiently considered my defenses of a particular sort of moral theory for the last 10 years, in a word, this philosopher has long been laboring under an unexamined assumption. Interesting. Presupposition, namely that there is such a thing as right and wrong. I now believe there isn't. So now Joel Marks, the one that used to write the column known as Moral Moments, defending atheist morality for decades, not decades, but rather years, I don't want to exaggerate, has taken back this theory and submitted that he no longer believes that there is such a thing as right and wrong. How I arrived at this conclusion is the subject of a book I have written during this recent period, tentatively titled Bad Faith, a personal memoir on atheism, amorality, and animals. I'm not sure if this book was ever published or if it kept that title, but interesting. The long and the short of it is that I became convinced that atheism implies amorality. Atheism implies no morality. And since I am an atheist, I must therefore embrace amorality. I call the premise of this argument hard atheism, namely to actually follow your worldview, because it is analogous to a thesis in philosophy known as hard determinism. Of course, hard determinism is where you believe that everything is predetermined. The latter holds that if metaphysical determinism is true, then there is no such thing as free will. Thus, a soft determinist believes that even if your reading of this column right now has followed by causal necessity from Big Bang 14 million years ago, you can still meaningfully be said to have chosen freely to read it. Analogously, a soft atheist would hold that one could still be an atheist and believe in morality, namely someone that doesn't really take their worldview too seriously. And indeed, the whole crop of new atheists are softies of this kind. So was I, until I experienced my shocking epiphany that the religious fundamentalists are correct. Interesting. Without God, there is no morality, but they are incorrect, I still believe, about there being a God. Hence, I believe, there is no morality. Why do I now accept hard atheism? I was struck by salient parallels between religion and morality, especially that both avail themselves of imperative commands which are intended to apply universally. In the case of religion, and most obviously theism, these commands emanate from a commander, and this all people call God, as Aquinas might have put it. The problem with theism is, of course, the shaky grounds for believing in God, according to Dr. Joel Marx. But the problem with morality, I now maintain, is that it is in even worse shape than religion in this regard. For if there was a God, his issuing commands would make some kind of sense. But if there is no God, as of course atheists assert, then what sense could be made of there being commands of this sort? In sum, while theists take the obvious existence of moral commands to be a kind of proof of the existence of a commander, i.e. God, I now take the non-existence of a commander as a kind of proof that there are no commands, i.e. morality. So again we see that Dr. Joel Marx once firmly believed in morality, once firmly believed in it to the degree of writing a column for years called A Moral Manifesto, in which he defended as his career the concept of objective morality. But instead of saying, well, if there's no God, there's no objective morality, but I clearly believe in objective morality, hence why I've been writing columns for years, and hence why this is my career, he chooses to go down the rabbit hole and join Alice in Wonderland. He states, I no longer believe in a commander, therefore I no longer believe there are such a thing as commands, and now I reject morality. Note the analogy to Darwinism, he states. It used to be the standard argument for God's existence that the obvious and absurd design of a universe, as manifested particularly in the elegant fit of organisms to their environments, indicated the existence of a divine designer. Now we know that biological evolution can account for this perfectly without recourse to God. Hence no designer, no design. There is only the appearance of design in nature, excepting such artifacts as beaver dams, bird nests, and architects' blueprints. Just so, there are no moral commands, but only the appearance of them. Again, the analogy of a matrix in which we're all deceived into believing the reality which appears in front of us, but it's all just a giant illusion. Joel Marx concludes at the end of his article by stating the following, and allow me to quote this quickly before we leave. A helpful analogy, at least for the atheist, is sin. Even though words like sinful and evil come naturally to the tongue as a description of, say, child molestation, they do not describe an actual property of anything. There are no literal sins in the world because there is no literal God, and hence the whole religious superstructure that would include such categories as sin and evil. Just so, I now maintain nothing is literally right or wrong because there is no morality. Dear viewers, I think this should suffice for you in demonstrating what someone can do with their own world and the livability of their world in their desire to justify there being no God. I pray for the guidance of such individuals, and let's not think it's because we're more intelligent that we can see beyond these people. Many of these individuals are more intelligent than us, and we thank Allah Azza wa Jal for guiding us to this, and we would have never been guided were it not for the guidance of Allah. Please remember me in your du'as, dear viewers. It is the night of Thursday. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.